Day 2 in the books from Big 12 football media days. We are recapping it with our Matthew Postins. He was there in Frisco, Texas, where, of course, media days was continuing on for a second straight day. So I'm Pete Mundo. We're Heartland College Sports, of course, and we appreciate you being here on the radio show, on the podcast. Drop that 5-star rating and review. And always on the YouTube channel, make sure you are subscribed. So, Matthew, we'll go team by team here, but was there a big takeaway for you on day 2 that encapsulates what this day was defined by?
I think a lot of the conversation was about revenue sharing and about the new world of college sports, perhaps even more so than day one. And I'm not really sure why the contrast was different one day or the other, but it seemed like there was a little less X's and O's talk and a little bit more talk about money. You know, Deion obviously on stage shouting out Joey McGuire for all the money that he has access to at Texas Tech. Sonny Dykes talked quite a bit about rev share and the fact that, you know, he says he really doesn't have money conversations with his players. He said that in the 4 years of the NIL era, he said he's had like 3 conversations with players about money, whereas he has coaches that are telling him they've had 20 conversations a day with players about money. So it's
Wow.
it's been a different kind of vibe this time around. It's been a pretty relaxed media days, not a lot of breaking news, not a lot of controversy. Just a common thread of coaches trying to wrap their arms around this new world of college football where revenue is shared with student athletes, and them. As soon as we put this to bed, the coaches are already talking about, we really need to collectively bargain with the players, which they're not wrong about, if we're being honest. If you want a uniform system
Yep.
across college football, you need to do that. But I mean, we haven't even gotten 2 weeks out of house,
So
of its implementation. So,
was there a theme that the coaches are just fed up with it, they're embracing it, they're exhausted by it? What is that sentiment as you read the tea leaves on that front?
I think it's all 3 themes. I think it's all that. I think they are excited with the fact that they can share revenue with players. I think Rich Rodriguez talked about the fact that he thinks that it will ultimately even the playing field to some degree. I do think some of these guys are just flat out exhausted with it. I think Gundy seems kind of exhausted with it to me. He didn't really say that, but that's just kind of the vibe I got. And it's a lot to wrap your brain around. Somebody asked Sonny Dykes if you know the rules, or do you know the rules yet? And Sonny's like, "Yeah, I think so."
Yeah.
I don't think anybody knows the rules yet. In
No.
part because the CSC hasn't really released a full rule book and hasn't really released what the punishment's going to be if you violate the rules. So we're still kind of operating in a system where there's guidance, but not a lot of firm guidance.
Well, let's dive into the coaches on day 2. Brett Yormark, the commissioner, spoke on day 1, but was obviously not speaking officially on day 2. So day 2 is all about the coaches. Let's start at the top with the big personalities. Mike Gundy had his worst season as a head coach last year at Oklahoma State, 0-9 in the Big 12 after being picked in the preseason to be right near the top of the Big 12. So does Mike Gundy feel like a new guy, a different guy, and is he embracing this new world where the expectations this year for him are going to be pretty darn high based on how bad last year was?
Yeah, I think he seems excited in terms of the fact that he has new assistant coaches. They hired a new OC and a new DC, and he does this every 2 or 3 years. And I think he does it in part because he wants guys to come in and bring fresh concepts and bring new ideas in. This is Mike Gundy has not hired the typical coordinator. He's hired guys from the Division II level because they come in with principles that he's not familiar with, but he thinks can work at this level. He was apparently very energized by his image in college football 26. He loves the hair, even though I think it looks like a helmet. He seems to love the hair. I think he's also getting ready to go on vacation. And he kind of made this point a few times that, he doesn't know. There's about 8 spots in his football team. He doesn't know who's going to start. He said usually he has a pretty good idea of the depth chart, the 2 deep, has a pretty good idea who's going to start. He said there are 8 positions on his team right now outside of special teams where he doesn't know who the starter is going to be yet. And I think he's going to try and put that aside while he's on vacation. but I have to imagine it's going to be in the back of his mind because that's a 30-year football team that where you don't know who the starter is going to be. And he said one of the things he's going to have to start getting used to as a coach is kind of embracing that and knowing that not every position is going to be settled and that you're going to have to figure out some of this in the 3.5 weeks you have in fall camp before you actually start the season.
Any idea where Gundy's going on vacay?
Maybe the farm. I don't know. He doesn't. He does not seem like the guy who strays very far when he goes on vacation. If you ask me.
I get that vibe. He doesn't seem. I mean, part of me feels like the mullet would work in Cancun, but he doesn't really feel like a Cancun guy to me. So I'm
No.
I'm with you there. Let's go to Deion Sanders, Coach Prime, Colorado. Tied, of course, atop the Big 12 last year for first place. Didn't make the championship game, but this is a really interesting time for him. Shadur's gone, Travis Hunter
Mm-hmm.
gone,
Yeah.
but this team, top to bottom, might be better, might have more depth. I mean, was there a sense of quiet confidence amongst Colorado?
Yeah, I think the players certainly have that. I mean, I would agree with you. I think this is the deepest team he's had in 3 years. It takes you time to
Yeah.
get the kind of depth accumulated that you need, especially in the offensive and defensive lines. He got a lot of criticism and a lot of flack for year one because quite frankly, the offensive line and the defensive line play just wasn't up to snuff. You don't build that in a year. You build it in 2, 3 years. And I think he's going into this season with perhaps the best left tackle in college football in Seton, and certainly an offensive line that is in very good shape. What I was kind of taken aback by was the fact that he kind of feels like there's still a quarterback battle between Keaton Salter, who is the quarterback from Liberty, who's got skins on the wall, has won a conference championship, took Liberty to an undefeated season. They went to a New Year's Six bowl, and Julian Lewis, the 5-star recruit who left early, left high school
Mm.
early to join Colorado this year, and you would think he would need that year as a redshirt to really develop and grow into the offense. I thought that was interesting. That could just be him trying to create, some extra competition between those guys, trying to keep Julian Lewis motivated because true freshmen rarely have the ability or the acumen to really, be starters right away. Good example, Quinn Ewers. He left early, a high school year early, went to Ohio State, didn't play a snap, if I recall. So it's interesting that he threw that out there because I fully expect Keaton Salter to be the starter when they play their first game. But it was typical Deion. A lot of hype, a lot of excitement. He seems like he's in good health, even though he really won't address the question. But he seemed like himself. If you're comparing this year to last year in terms of just his energy, I think he feels like he's got a good football team this year, and I think he feels like he's got the program moving in the right direction. He's talking about somebody asked him, "What is your goal? 3 years from now?" He said, "Well, my goal 3 years from now is to win. My goal right now is to win." So that's all he's focused on right now. Would appear is winning.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, one of the new faces in the Big 12, Rich Rodriguez. It's a homecoming of sorts to West Virginia, but he's never coached in the Big 12.
True.
How? Listen, I think Rich Rod is the antithesis of Neil Brown, stylistically, personality wise. Was that on display? And if so, how did it come across?
I think he expressed a lot of gratitude throughout the day to just be back at West Virginia. If you think about when he left for
Yep.
Michigan, that team, the last 3 years he was there, I think they lost 3 games total. I mean, they were one of the best teams in the country. And Michigan comes along, and it's Michigan. I mean, I probably would have taken that job, even if I was a hometown West Virginia kid, I probably would have taken this job. And he is, circuited all the way around. I did not realize that for a year he was an analyst at Hawaii.
I didn't
Like
know that either.
between Ole Miss and being the assistant head coach in the OC at Louisiana Monroe, he was an analyst at Hawaii for a year. I mean,
Wow.
this guy has taken the long way around to come back home, and he said he was happy at Jacksonville State. He would have stayed at Jacksonville State for anybody else, but West Virginia came calling. He was like, I gotta take a shot and go home. And he made it sound like this is it. Like, I'm not going anywhere else. I think at one point he said something like, I'm home and I'm going to stay home. So he seems thrilled to be back. He seems thrilled with the investment they've made there overall in the program. He said the first time that he, took a tour of their new football building that was not there when he was there, it took his breath away. It's just miles, miles away from what he had 17 years before. But I think he also knows this is going to be a rebuilding job. They lost a lot in the portal and to graduation. He feels like he's got three different quarterbacks that can play. They've got some nice pieces in the run game and some nice pieces on the defensive side of the ball, but they wholesale went into the portal and flipped the roster. And he said a lot of the things you'll see from West Virginia are going to look familiar if you've followed his career and followed what he does in offense. But he says he's picked up some things along the way that he thinks will make the offense look a little fresh. And I think their success that first year is really going to depend on their defense. If their defense plays well, if they can hang their hat on that while they figure out the things they need to figure out on offense, they could have a solid first year. I mean, remember this. You don't remember this, but when he took over in 2001, he took over a Don Nalen team that I believe won 8 or 9 games the year before. They went 3-9 his first year. So he's happy to be home, but I'd keep the expectations a little bit low on where they might be by the end of the year.
That's more than fair, and I know that the Mountaineers faithful will give him time. There's no doubt about it. I want to go to. I mean, there's a lot of places to go right now. We got 5 teams, and we got 10 or so minutes to run them down here. He's Matthew Postins. I'm Pete Mundo. HeartlandCollegeSports.com is where you find us, of course. So let's do TCU. Sonny Dykes, kind of trying to get back to where they were when they made that national championship run. Not saying they have that team, but they had the best quarterback in Josh Hoover. Got to get the defense figured out. How's Sonny feeling?
He sounded like a guy who feels like he knows where everybody's going to be on the field going into fall workouts. He made a point of saying, we didn't lose a lot of players in the portal. They obviously lost players to the NFL and their eligibility, but they didn't lose a lot of players in the portal. And he felt pretty good about that in terms of just, even though on paper they don't look like they have a lot of returning starters, especially on the defensive side of the football. He feels like they brought guys back who were second string on the 2 deep last year, third string on the 2 deep last year, who have made progress in terms of especially their defense going into this year. You had the eternal Bud Clark, who is in his 6th year, and it anchors their secondary. I think he feels really happy about that. He feels really good about Josh Hoover's experience. Josh Hoover said he felt really good about what they have in the wide receiver room, even though a lot of it is brand new. They feel good about it. They feel good about their chances. They're not, thumping their chest saying they're going to win the Big 12, but I think they feel good about their ability to compete on a weekly basis. I think they feel good about their ability to be a contender in this race, especially if they can, figure out, what their receiver room is going to look like in terms of who's going to start, who's going to be those 2 or 3 guys that are going to, have Josh Hoover's back, and then figure out the defensive line. They got to get more pressure on the quarterback. That's definitely something that's going to be a focus for them during fall workout.
Yeah. Now, Kansas, listen, this is a team, we can say this about so many of these Big 12 teams. They think that they've got a shot. They feel like they're in the mix. KU closed strong last season once Jalen Daniels got his feet back under him, coming off a couple of years of injuries. Yeah. What's your read on where the Jayhawks are at right now coming into the season after media days?
Yeah, I think it's all about Jalen Daniels, and he was there and he talked quite a bit about, he feels like he's the healthiest he's ever been. He feels like he's the most prepared he's ever been going into a season. And in talking to Lance Leipold in the breakout sessions, when they made the decision to elevate one of their coaches to offensive coordinator after they lost their OC, Leipold actually called Jalen Daniels and said, you have any issues with this? And Jalen's like, no, I'm good. When they were thinking about bringing wide receivers in the transfer portal, they had Jalen sit down and watch film with them and critique them and give him his opinion. And obviously, you probably heard that the wide receivers went out and worked out with him in California earlier this summer. So there seems to be this theme of they're all in on Jalen Daniels, because I think they know that if he can reach his ceiling as a player, Kansas could do some really good things this year. They've got talent around them. They've got a solid defense. They're another one of those teams where they don't look like they have a lot of returning starters on paper, but they've got guys in their 2 deep that have a lot of experience that can take that next step. But it kind of feels like they've put all of their eggs in that Jalen Daniels basket and said, stay healthy, play 12 games, reach your potential, and we think we can be a contender in this conference.
Yeah, and I think that's the smartest thing that KU could do based on how last year ended. Utah did not have a great season. Speaking of teams dealing with quarterback injuries, that was a big reason for the struggles last year. We know that Kyle Whittingham has the coach in waiting in the wings. Kind of like Mike Gundy, one of the longest tenured coaches in all of college football. Is that fire still there for Kyle Whittingham, and what can it lead to this year? Hang on a second. We got you muted. Let me unmute you. There we go. We got you. So, do you hear my question there on Kyle Whittingham?
I did hear your question. I'm sorry.
All right.
I got an Amber Alert on my phone. That's what disconnected us for a minute. But yes, he talked like a guy who quite frankly, might be out the door after the end of the year. You saw the quote he gave Pete Thamel at the beginning of the day. I really didn't want to go out that way. If we'd have won the conference, I might have gone ahead and decided to call it quits after last season. He made some big changes in the offseason, most notably bringing in Jason Beck as offensive coordinator, who was at New Mexico. His quarterback, Devin Dampier, followed him. Dampier is a dynamic dual threat quarterback who can throw and pass. Kyle Whittingham has given him complete license to do what he wants offensively. And Whittingham has said with his coordinators, he's always done that. It's your ball, you take it. The only thing he asks is just protect the football.
Yep.
So when you think about what Dampier can do for this offense, it's going to look different. It's going to look a lot different. It's not going to look like Cam Rising or Isaac or Wilson last year. It's going to look more like an RPO dual threat quarterback kind of offense. They're gonna let Dampier run the ball. They're gonna work on making sure he gets into quick reads and quick throws, and really try to push the tempo a little bit on the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, I think he feels really good because he had a lot of guys on defense that were banged up last year. Most of them are back. They're back in the starting lineup, and Utah's always traditionally had a really good defense. So I think he feels like the program's in a good place. I think now it's, can you put the hangover of last year aside and just put that in a box, let it go. It happened. It was a bad year, and put things together and get back to being what Utah was typically in the Pac-12, which was a contender every year. And they certainly have the tools to do it. I don't know if they have enough tools to do it. I worry about their pass rush. That's my biggest concern. If you don't have a good pass rush in this conference, you're going to have a hard time being successful. That's the area where I worry about them the most. They've got a couple good pass rushers, but can they do it consistently week after week?
Yeah, that's a great point. A team looking to make a big jump this year is Houston. Listen, they have a program builder. They may have their quarterback. That was obviously a big issue for them last year. But what's your read on the Cougars and what this year can look like as they try to make that year 2 jump?
Well, I hope they start 0-1 because they're playing my Lumberjacks in week 0. Um, we SFA's got to go down there to Houston and play on a Thursday night. So I'm hoping they start 0-1.
Fair enough.
But fair enough. But one thing Willie Fritz really talked about today was the depth in their team. If we talked about Deion earlier and the fact that they didn't have a lot of depth in their offense and defensive line, Willie Fritz felt the same way about his entire team last year because he got there in January. They didn't really they had kind of a truncated portal thing in January. They lost another group of guys after the spring portal ended in April. And he felt like they were kind of behind the 8 ball all year. This year, you've got a year to install everything. You've got guys that have been there for a year. You did a much better job of retaining players, bringing in players in the portal who have kind of bought into what you're doing. And he also brought in an offensive coordinator that he worked with at Tulane that he thinks is really going to energize their offense, help support Connor Wigman in a way which he may not have been supported at A&M from a play calling standpoint. I think he feels really good about what they have in terms of just the depth. Now it's about, can you put these things together in a way where you can be competitive? There were games where they were competitive in the Big 12. I was at their game against TCU, the first game they won under Fritz in the Big 12. They were highly competitive in that game, even though they were, to me, frankly, undermanned. So, with the right depth and the right play caller on offense, I think they can take a step in the right direction. I think a bowl game is a great second year step for them, and it's what Fritz tends to do. The first year tends to be a little bit, lukewarm. The second year gets better. Maybe you get to a bowl game. And then the third year, the fourth year, the fifth year, the way he builds programs, that's when you start to see the real success come.
All right, let's put a bow on it with Arizona. Brent Brennan may have the hottest seat in the Big 12, right up there with Scott Satterfield. Noah Fafita has a new offensive coordinator in Seth Daigie.
Yep.
And is there confidence there, or is there, holy crap, hang on, let's see if we can try to save our jobs?
I think the holy crap hang on was last year with
Yeah.
everything that happened in terms of injuries, in terms of depth, in terms of, the situation Brent Brennan inherited, as we've kind of found out over time, wasn't nearly as good as we thought, because Jed Fish was trying to poach a lot of guys out
Mm-hmm.
of that program to Washington, and Brennan had to fend him off and other programs off just to keep guys like T-Mac and Noah Fafita. So I think the thing that he's excited about is that he's got some continuity after a year. Fafita stuck around. He kind of addressed that today. Like there were folks throwing everything at Noah Fafita to try and get him to leave the program, and Noah stuck around in part because of what he's trying to build there at Arizona. But I think comparing last year to this year, I saw a much more confident Brent Brennan at the podium talking to the media, just in the way that he was talking about how he's approaching this season. He said last year they got caught up in the result and not necessarily the process.
Hmm.
And they've spent a lot of time breaking that apart, getting back to being more of a process-driven program in the off season, so that the result they hope will be better on the field. I was talking with Justin Spears, who's at the Arizona Daily Star, and he pointed out something to me that I had never really thought about. So the last year they were in the Pac-12, they lost 3 games. They lost those games, I think, by like a combined 16 points. Last year, they lost their games by a combined 180 something points. I mean, it was just this huge swing, one way or the other. So if Arizona improves, that is going to that disparity is going to lessen. And I kind of think they can be a team like Kansas last year, even though Kansas, didn't end up winning a lot of games. Kansas was in most of their games last year. I
Yeah.
think they lost 4 or 5 games by a touchdown or less. I feel like Arizona makes progress this year. They're going to be that kind of team that's going to be in every game. Maybe they won't win enough, but it won't be a season where they get blown out, 2, 3, 4 times in a row.
I'm with you. That is one of the more intriguing teams. I know they'll be picked near the bottom by most people in the Big 12, but if things click and break just right for them, it could be a very different season. Matthew,
Yeah.
great job at Frisco this week. I know it was a busy week for you. We've got 16 teams in this league, but at least we were not talking the R word realignment. So well done, my man.
Absolutely. I do like the way that they did the breakouts this year. They staggered them a little bit. So they had four sets of players for 30 minutes, then another 4 set of players, and 4 sets of coaches, and then 4 coaches. So it actually helped us out a little bit. I was able to get to more people, talk to, gather some more info for stories that we'll be working through here at Heartland for the next 5-6 weeks until we get to actual games when Iowa State and Kansas State square off in Dublin.
In week 0. And
Mm-hmm.
our Big 12 friends are listening, so hopefully they will take your advice and keep that methodology going on how they roll out these sessions during the day. So great job, my man. We appreciate you being here.
All right. Thanks, Pete.
All
Appreciate it.
right, he's Matthew Postins. You're reading him on HeartlandCollegeSports.com. I'm Pete Mundo. Make sure you are subscribed right now to the show, YouTube, the podcast, and always appreciate our radio affiliates. Join us and find us at HeartlandCollegeSports.com.